Castle Duckula, home for many centuries to a dreadful dynasty of vicious vampire ducks, and the most famous vampire duck of them all, Count Duckula. We're all familiar with his vegetarianism as well as his lack of both fangs and bloodlust, but how much do we know about Duckula's origins? What do we know about Duckula's family and his lineage? If Duckula has been reincarnated several times, then what do we know about his previous incarnations, or the very first Count Duckula? Was Duckula even the first vampire duck? And whatever happened to Count Duckula after the narrator bid goodnight out there for the last time in February 1993? To answer these questions, we need to go back in search of the first vampire duck, the original Count Duckula, and for any more of Duckula's ancestors and living relatives by venturing deeper into the dark and bloody past of one of history's most dreadful dynasties and frightful ancestries, the Duckula bloodline, and the Counts of Duckula. Count Duckula may be the first vegetarian vampire, but he wasn't the first vampire duck, nor was he the first to be called Duckula. The original can be traced all the way back to 1976 when comic book writer Scott Shaw created the character Duckula for the first edition of the comic book Quack. In 1979, Filmation produced the New Adventures of Mighty Mouse and Heckle and Jekyll and introduced a new character, Quackula, voiced by Frank Welker. Quackula is a blue-fanged vampiric duck who speaks with a Transylvanian accent and who sleeps in an egg-shaped coffin beneath a house owned by a bear, Theodore, who hates Quackula and is constantly trying to get rid of the squatter living in his basement. Quackula's favorite thing to do is to scare people, especially Theodore, but isn't very good at it and is a complete failure of a vampire. After seeing model sheets for Quackula, Scott Shaw successfully sued Filmation for plagiarism. The case was settled out of court, and after 16 episodes, Quackula was dropped from the show. In 1981, British animation studio Cosgrove Hall Films debuted the first of 89 episodes of Danger Mouse for Thames Television. Danger Mouse is billed as the world's greatest secret agent and is regularly ordered by Secret Service to save the world from Danger Mouse's arch-nemesis, Baron Silas Greenback. In the episode The 4 Tasks of Danger Mouse, Greenback has kidnapped Danger Mouse's sidekick Penfold and holds him ransom in exchange for Danger Mouse helping him locate 4 exotic ingredients of an ancient spell for creating an invincible monster. The ingredients include 2 feathers from a vampire duck, which leads Danger Mouse to Transylvania where he encounters Count Duckula. British screen legend Sir David Jason voiced the roles of both Danger Mouse and Count Duckula, who speaks with an American accent and with an exaggerated lisp. Duckula is also obsessed with becoming famous, and in exchange for helping Danger Mouse, Duckula asks him if he could get him on television, and goes on to demonstrate his talents. When he is turned down, an indignant Count Duckula turns on Danger Mouse, who is only saved by the rising sun and Duckula's exposure to sunlight. Count Duckula has the ability to transform into different characters at will, and in later episodes also has the ability to transform into inanimate objects, like a cricket bat. Get it? Vampire bat? Count Duckula would go on to appear in another 3 episodes of Danger Mouse, and in the last of these episodes, Duckula meets Frankenstein. We are taken into the heart of his Transylvanian home, Castle Duckula, which Danger Mouse and Penfold infiltrate. By the end of the episode, Duckula is last seen disappearing down a bottomless pit, never to be seen again. In 1984, Nickelodeon acquired the US broadcast rights to Danger Mouse, which became a hit for the channel. And after a few years, the Nickelodeon management came to Cosgrove Hall wishing to co-produce a new series. After being shown a number of ideas, the then head of Nickelodeon, Jerry Laybourne, spotted a picture of Count Duckula in Brian Cosgrove's office and said, "That's the one I want." Duckula was reincarnated in 1988, and Count Duckula debuted on TV on the 6th of September that year. Count Duckula the series was in many ways a parody of the Dracula story, as well as the gothic melodramatic Vincent Price movies, with the series featuring a cast of characters made up of different kinds of birds. This latest reincarnation of the Nosferatu duck bore a few similarities with the Danger Mouse villain. David Jason once again voiced Count Duckula with an American accent, although the exaggerated lisp was dropped, and his costume remained largely the same, comprised of a black coat with a purple lining, a red bow tie, and, like many cartoon ducks before him, no pants. This time, however, Duckula is no longer a villain. His lust for fame is toned down and his lust for blood is completely removed, as this incarnation of Duckula is in fact a vegetarian, due to a hiccup in the resurrection ceremony. The dark and brooding Castle Duckula is still the Count's home, and has the ability to teleport not only around the world, but also back in time. Additionally, Duckula is accompanied by 2 staff members, Nanny, a hen and the castle's incompetent housekeeper, and Eagle, a vulture butler who also mentors Duckula in the ways of the vampire. In fact, a recurring theme is Eagle's repeated, fruitless attempts to turn a disinterested Duckula into a proper vampire, to Eagle's never-ending despair. It's mentioned that both Eagle and Nanny have been with the family for many centuries, at least 8 centuries in the case of Eagle, and Nanny is known to have been in the family's service since at least the 19th century. Many episodes also feature Duckula's nemesis, Dr. von Goosewing, a brave but incompetent vampire hunter who blindly refuses to believe the current incarnation of Duckula is harmless. Duckula's origin story is told at the beginning of every episode, which opens with an establishing shot of Castle Duckula, home for many centuries to a dreadful dynasty of vicious vampire ducks, the Counts of Duckula. While there are at least 2 ways to kill a vampire duck, they may be brought back to life by means of a secret rite that can be performed once a century when the moon is in the 8th house of Aquarius. Eagle and Nanny attempt to resurrect Duckula once again, but things go wrong when Nanny mistakenly replaces a key ingredient in the ritual, blood, with ketchup, and consequently, the newest version is not a blood-sucking vampire, but a vegetarian one, who is more interested in juicy vegetables than juicy victims. Each resurrection of Duckula creates a new incarnation of himself with little to no memory of its past life, and the immediate past incarnation is referred to as the current's father. In other words, Duckula is his own father, as his father is really just his previous incarnation, and his grandfather is the incarnation before that, and so on. Vampire ducks are incredibly ancient, as revealed in the episode Transylvanian Homesick Blues, when Duckula, Eagle and Nanny traveled 1,000,000 years into the past and met the first ever vampire, who just happens to be a prehistoric duck. Later, the trio traveled back in time again to the year 1199 in an attempt to stop the first Count Duckula from becoming a vampire. As detailed in the episode The Rest is History, the original Count Duckula was an aristocratic duck and also a vegetarian, and it was Eagle who turned him into a vampire by allowing Duckula to be bitten by a vampire bat. During that same trip through time, Duckula and company meet more of Duckula's ghastly ancestors, including one who was a Transylvanian ambassador to the court of Elizabeth I, and an earlier ancestor who was a terrifying knight in armor. A stone replica of Count Duckula IV wakes up in the episode One Stormy Night and causes chaos in Castle Duckula. And in the very first episode of the series, Eagle takes Count Duckula on a tour of the castle's portrait gallery and shows him portraits of both himself in previous incarnations, including one of Duckula III at an early age, as well as Duckula's ancestors, like his great-uncle's great-uncle, the Archduke Maganza, a famous Egyptologist. The episode Dear Diary introduces us to Duckula's great-grandfather, like all of Duckula's ancestors, a proper vampire, according to Eagle, and we learn more about him through a series of flashbacks as Duckula reads his ancestors' diary entries from the 19th century. We learn that this Duckula was guarded by Eagle during the day as he sleeps in a coffin by night, unlike the current Duckula who sleeps in a bed and is awake during the day. As well as Duckula's ancestors, we are introduced to several of his living vampire family throughout the series, if you consider an undead duck to be living. The second episode, Vampire Vacation, sees Duckula and his entourage travel to Spain where they meet Don Diego, Duckula's Spanish pyromaniac cousin. While the episode The Ghost of Castle MacDuckula sees Duckula travel to Scotland where he unwittingly meets his father's father's uncle's uncle, Rory MacDuckula, the Scourge of the Glens. We are finally introduced to Duckula's entire ghoulish family in the episode Family Reunion, where Duckula is tasked with hosting the traditional family reunion on Halloween. but Igor warns Duckula that his vampiric relatives will kill him if they find out he is not a real vampire. The only two members of this family gathering whose names we know are his aunt Lucretia and his uncle Vlad, who does most of the talking and who seems to be a blood connoisseur. Duckula attempts to play along in pretending he is a vampire, but soon panics as the true horror of the situation dawns on him and he realizes that his life is in danger and his home is filled with blood-crazed fiends. On 16 February 1993, the show's narrator said, "Good night out there for the last time," but that would not be the last we would see of Count Duckula. He, Igor and Nanny reprised their roles in the Count Duckula spin-off series, Victor and Hugo, Bunglers in Crime, with a cameo appearance in the episode Treasure Haunt, with David Jason reprising his role of voicing Duckula. Danger Mouse was rebooted in 2015 and Count Duckula was once again reincarnated, this time voiced by Rasmus Hardeko. This rendition of Duckula incorporated elements from both the original Danger Mouse series and the Count Duckula series, appearing once again as a villain, a vegetarian, and, as seen in his first appearance in the episode From Duck to Dawn, has finally made it as a celebrity, hosting the Count Duckula show, which he broadcasts from his studio in Castle Duckula. Duckula would go on to appear in various merchandise releases, including comic books, a board game, not one but two computer games, and even a slot machine. Today, Duckula is as and perhaps even more popular and better known than its parent series Danger Mouse, and is particularly popular in Latin America, thanks mainly to an excellent, innovative and influential Spanish dubbing. That's all we have time for today. I'll be back again soon with some more cartoon history, and in the near future I'll share with you my picks for the 5 darkest Count Duckula episodes. So please let me know in the comments which episodes you particularly remember, and they might just end up on the list. So, until next time, good night out there, whatever you are.